Kyle is an adult now, but he carries a recollection of a dark and horrifying experience. He claims to have experienced this when he was only 5 years old, an encounter he says he's now fortunate to have survived. He claims to have a rather unsettled early childhood, partially due to his family's frequent relocations. He admits most of his memories from the years before are a bit fuzzy, as he was still very young at the time. But one particularly bizarre incident, which he claims to remember with absolute clarity, continues to haunt him into his adult life. Something so horrible, his mind is still attempting to process it decades later. It all began the day after his 5th birthday, with an onset of strange fever and unexplained diagnosis. The one event stands out among them all, a chilling, bizarre encounter he still maintains actually happened. That was the night he claimed to have met the creature named Mr. Widemouth. Kyle and his parents were living in a large older house in the outskirts of New Vineyard, Maine, when he was struck with the illness. His life was already undergoing upheavals at the time, as his parents were preparing for a move to Pennsylvania. Most of his personal belongings were packed away in boxes. It was a lot for a 5-year-old mind to process, but that was just the beginning. Confined to his bed for several weeks, Kyle admits that his imagination often drifted into flights of fancy, but during that time, he distinctly remembers being visited by a talking creature. He at first thought it was a surprise gift from his mother to cheer him up while he was bedridden. The creature said that he was no mere toy, but a real friend to be kept hidden from his parents. He managed to prove this by staying by Kyle's side for several days, reading his books and making idle conversation, at least until the boy's mother came to check on him, during which time Mr. Widemouth would hide under the bed.
I don't want your parents to see me,
the new friend explained,
because I'm afraid they won't let us play anymore.
Kyle mentioned 2 specific secret games he played with Mr. Widemouth, the first of which the creature offered to teach him once the boy's mother left the room.
First, we have to go to the room at the end of this hallway.
Despite the sick child's protests, he finally convinced Kyle to visit the room, which was now unfurnished and empty in preparation for the move. The only feature was a large window, which Mr. Widemouth pushed open. He invited the boy to take a look outside and gaze down at the ground far below, for the room was on a 2nd floor, and a steep hill made the drop even further.
I like to play pretend up here. I pretend there is a big soft trampoline below this window, and I jump. If you pretend hard enough, you bounce back up like a feather.
He then encouraged Kyle to try this game himself. But even in the haze of his illness, he knew it would be a bad idea, at least until he had had a chance to recover fully. Mr. Widemouth looked angry at first, but eventually seemed to give up, returning to his hiding place beneath Kyle's bed. The next day, his new friend offered to teach him a different game, which apparently involved juggling several very sharp kitchen knives. The boy protested even stronger this time, not only frightened of the dangerous blades, but of his parents' reaction if they found out he was keeping a box of knives in his room. Mr. Widemouth was now growing visibly irritated, but finally relented again and returned to his hiding place, taking the box of knives with him. But in the nights to come, the strange visitor became more threatening, continually trying to convince the boy to perform dangerous tricks, games, and stunts he had taken, to offering his suggestions for these games into Kyle's ear late at night when he was asleep, making it more and more difficult for him, and he became quite scared. After a while, Kyle's mother finally allowed him to go outside for a short while, thinking the fresh air and sunlight would do him good. He immediately felt better, exploring the large backyard and playing. That is, until he encountered Mr. Widemouth at the edge of the dense woods bordering their property.
I have something I want you to see. It's safe. I promise.
What he showed him was the beginning of a narrow dirt trail, winding through the trees and disappearing into the thick growth beyond.
This is an important path. I've had a lot of friends about your age. When they were ready, I took them down this path to a special place. You aren't ready yet, Kyle, but one day, I hope to take you there.
Several weeks passed, and Kyle finally recovered. Mr. Widemouth made a few more appearances, but seemed less interested in teaching him games, and instead just sat on the bed, quiet and calm. When it came time for the family to move, Kyle decided not to tell his secret friend, and instead focused his mind on the upcoming destination. Kyle and his father had a talk, and he was comforted a little by his father's assurances that this move would be more permanent thanks to his new job promotion, and that they could settle down properly from now on. On moving day, Kyle caught one last glimpse of Mr. Widemouth framed up in his bedroom window. He looked clearly saddened by the boy's departure and gave a meek wave goodbye. And that seemed to be the end of that surreal experience. Until many years later. One day, Kyle felt a strange compulsion to visit his former home in New Vineyard. So he went on a road trip. When Kyle arrived, he found the charred remains of what was once their house, surrounded by scorched trees and overgrown with weeds. But the trail Mr. Widemouth had shown him long ago was still there. So Kyle decided to see where it led. It ended in an open grove, which happened to be the site of a hidden memorial cemetery. Even through his growing terror, Kyle could see nearly all the grave markers belonged to children, most of whom had died between the ages of 6 and 10 years old.